I will never forget the most terrifying night of my life. My innocent son was sick, and in the chaos of caring for him, I got delayed in making dinner. That small delay was enough to send my husband into a fit of rage. His voice thundered through the house as he yelled, "Why is dinner late?" Before I could explain, he did something unthinkable. He shoved me down the stairs, right in front of our child. Pain exploded through my body as I crashed onto the floor, my vision fading into darkness. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed, struggling to make sense of what had happened. But just when I thought the worst was over, he came back. And what he did next was even more horrifying than before. Hello everyone, my name is Lena Foster, and I am 32 years old. If you had asked me a few years ago what love meant, I would have told you it was everything. That it was supposed to fix the broken pieces, to make life whole, to be enough. I grew up believing in fairy tales, convinced that if I found the right person, everything would fall into place. And when I met Daniel, I thought I had. He was charming, confident, and knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. I met him in a coffee shop in Seattle, where I was grading papers, back when I was still a teacher. He sat at the table next to me and effortlessly started a conversation. I remember how he made me laugh, how he listened to me like I was the most interesting person in the world. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He made me feel like I was the center of his universe. A year later, we were married. Daniel had big dreams. He wanted to start his own business, to build something great. He convinced me to leave my teaching job, so I could focus on our home, while he worked toward success. It made sense, he had said. It's temporary. Once things settle, we'll have everything we ever wanted. I trusted him. I believed in him. I was wrong. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream. I loved making our house a home, planning meals, and imagining the beautiful life we were going to create. I told myself that supporting Daniel's ambitions was part of being a good wife, that we were a team, working toward a better future together. And for a while, it even felt right. But then, things started to change slowly, almost unnoticeably at first. Little comments that made me second-guess myself. You didn't clean properly today. What do you even do all day? They weren't outright cruel. Not yet, but they planted tiny seeds of doubt in my mind. Was I really doing enough? Could I do better? So I worked harder. I kept the house spotless. I made sure dinner was ready the moment he walked in. I avoided anything that might upset him. I told myself that if I just tried harder, everything would be okay. Then our son, Ethan, was born, and for a little while, things got better. Holding him in my arms, I felt a kind of love I had never known before. He became my entire world. I poured all my energy into being the best mother I could be. Daniel seemed happy too, at least in the beginning. But happiness with him was always temporary. The stress of his business failures began to weigh on him. And suddenly I became his punching bag, not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. His words cut deeper than any wound ever could. You're lucky I put up with you. If it weren't for me, you'd have nothing. You're a terrible wife. Useless. At first, I tried to defend myself. I told him how much I did, how hard I worked to keep things running smoothly, how I barely even had time to rest. But he always had an answer, twisting my words, making me feel small, worthless, like I was failing at the only thing I was supposed to be good at, being his wife and Ethan's mother. And then he started snapping at Ethan too. My sweet, innocent boy, who only wanted his father's love. Daniel would scold him over the smallest things, leaving his toys out, talking too loudly, asking too many questions. I did my best to shield Ethan, to step in before Daniel's temper flared. But it only made things worse. Stop babying him, Lena, Daniel would sneer. Maybe if you disciplined him properly, I wouldn't have to step in. It didn't matter what I said. It was always my fault. And so I convinced myself that I could handle it. That if I just tried harder, was a better wife, a better mother, things would get better. But the truth was, Daniel didn't want a wife. He wanted someone to control. And one night, everything changed. It had been a long, exhausting day. Ethan had been sick, and I had barely slept the night before, waking up every few hours to check on him. My body felt like it was running on empty, but I still managed to make dinner, clean the house, and make sure everything was in order before Daniel got home. But when he walked in that night, I could already tell something was wrong. His expression was dark, his movements sharp and tense. I knew that look. Another failed business deal. Another excuse for him to take out his frustration on me. I barely had time to say hello before he snapped. "Why is dinner late?" I forced myself to stay calm. It wasn't late. The food was still warm on the table. But I knew that logic didn't matter to Daniel when he was in this mood. "It's not," I said softly, trying to keep the peace. "It's right here." "Don't talk back to me, Lena," he warned, his voice laced with something I had learned to fear. Ethan was sitting at the table, watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. My heart ached for him. He shouldn't have to see this. He shouldn't have to grow up like this. "Let's just eat, okay?" I tried again, hoping to diffuse the situation. But Daniel wasn't interested in eating. He wanted to fight. He needed to feel in control. "You don't do anything all day, and you can't even have dinner ready on time?" he spat. I wanted to tell him about my day, about how I had been up all night taking care of our son, about how I had barely sat down all day, making sure everything was perfect for him. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said ever mattered. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "I asked you a question." His voice was low, dangerous. I heard Ethan let out a small, scared whimper, and my heart clenched. I couldn't let him see this. "Daniel, please," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Not in front of Ethan. That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes flashed with rage. And then suddenly I was falling. I didn't even have time to process it. One second I was standing at the top of the stairs, and the next my feet slipped from under me. I tumbled down the steps, hitting each one on the way down. I don't remember the moment I hit the ground. Only the sharp, searing pain that shot through my body. The sound of Ethan screaming. And then, darkness. When I woke up, everything hurt. A dull, throbbing pain pulsed through my head, and my left arm burned like it was on fire. The bright hospital lights stung my eyes, making it hard to focus. For a moment, I didn't even know where I was. Then, I heard a voice, my mother's voice. "Lena, sweetheart, I'm here." She was sitting beside my hospital bed, her hands wrapped around mine. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she had been crying. Memories of the fall rushed back all at once. The stairs. Ethan screaming. The pain. Daniel. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Where's Ethan?" "He's safe," my mother assured me quickly. "He's with your father. He's scared, but he's okay." I exhaled shakily. That was all that mattered. Ethan was safe. But before I could process anything else, a familiar voice sent a chill down my spine. "Are you done with this drama now?" My whole body went rigid. Daniel. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room, arms crossed, shaking his head like I had inconvenienced him. Not worried. Not apologetic. Just annoyed. I blinked at him in disbelief. Drama? I had a fractured arm, a concussion, and bruises covering my body. But to him, I was just being dramatic. "Daniel, I fell down the stairs," I whispered, still struggling to process everything. He scoffed. "Yeah? And whose fault is that?" A hollow silence filled the room. Was he really blaming me? I turned to my mother, expecting her to be just as shocked, but her face was set in stone. She had always been patient with Daniel, always urging me to work things out for the sake of my marriage. But not anymore. This time, she saw him for what he really was. I turned back to Daniel. "I can't just leave. I have a fractured arm and a head injury." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous, Lena. Do you have any idea how much this hospital stay is costing me? I don't have money to waste on your carelessness." Tears burned behind my eyes. I had spent years making myself small, walking on eggshells to avoid setting him off. But this was cruel. I clenched my jaw. "I'm not leaving." Daniel's face darkened instantly. He stepped forward, gripping my uninjured arm painfully tight. "You don't get to decide that." I sucked in a sharp breath. He was going to drag me out of the hospital if he had to. But this time, he didn't get the chance. A voice cut through the tension like a knife.
Let
her go. Daniel and I both turned to see a nurse standing in the doorway, pale but firm. And beside her stood 2 security guards and a police officer. For the first time, Daniel looked nervous. Daniel's grip loosened for just a second, but he didn't let go completely. Instead, he turned to the police officer, forcing a fake, charming smile, the same one he used when he wanted to manipulate people. "Officer, this is just a misunderstanding. She's my wife." The officer didn't budge. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was firm. "I don't care who you are. You need to step away from her. Now." For a moment, Daniel didn't move. His jaw clenched, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was debating whether to obey or push back, whether he could still control the situation. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. The nurse stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. "I saw what you did. You grabbed her, and she's already injured. We won't let you hurt her again." My heart pounded. They saw him. They knew. Daniel let go of my arm slowly, but I could see the rage burning behind his eyes. He knew he had lost this round, but he wasn't going to go down quietly. "This is insane," he muttered. "She's my wife. I have every right to take her home." The officer didn't even blink. "No, you don't. Not when there's clear evidence of assault." Before Daniel could react, the officer nodded to the security guards. In an instant, they grabbed Daniel's arms and forced him against the wall. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, struggling against their grip. "Daniel Foster, you're under arrest for domestic assault and harassment." The officer's voice was calm, but there was no room for argument. This was really happening. Daniel tried to fight back, twisting his body, but the security guards held him firm. For the first time, he wasn't the one with power. "You can't do this." "She's my wife," he roared, his voice filled with fury. But no one listened. As they restrained him and placed him in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. He couldn't hurt me anymore. I watched as they dragged him toward the door, his face red with rage. But just before they took him out, he turned back to me, his eyes narrowing with venom. "You'll regret this, Lena." His voice was low, dangerous. "You have no idea what you've started." I met his gaze, my body still aching, my arms still burning with pain. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I took a deep breath and spoke the words I had never dared to say before.
"No, Daniel.
You're the one who has no idea what you've started." And then they took him away. The moment Daniel was out of the room, my entire body collapsed into the hospital bed. My breath came in shaky gasps, as if I had been holding it in for years. My mother rushed to my side, her hands trembling as she brushed the hair away from my face. "It's over, sweetheart. He's gone." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that Daniel's arrest meant the end of all of this. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The police officer stayed behind, approaching my bed carefully. "Miss Foster, I know this is a lot, but we need to take your statement." I nodded, my throat dry. I was tired, hurting, emotionally drained, but this was important. I had spent too long staying silent, convincing myself that things weren't as bad as they really were. But now, the whole world had seen Daniel for who he really was. And I needed to make sure he never got the chance to hurt me or Ethan again. With my mother holding my hand, I told the police everything. I told them about the years of manipulation and control, how Daniel had slowly chipped away at my confidence, my freedom, my sense of self. I told them how he had started lashing out at Ethan, how I had tried to shield my son from his father's anger. And finally, I told them about that night. The way Daniel had grabbed me, the way I had fallen down the stairs, the way he had stood over me without an ounce of concern. I could see the officer's expression harden as he listened, writing everything down. "You're doing the right thing, Miss Foster," he said when I finished. "We won't let him get away with this." I wanted to believe him, but part of me still feared Daniel. He had always found a way to manipulate his way out of consequences. Not this time. I spent a few more days in the hospital recovering. My fractured arm was put in a cast, and the doctors kept me for observation because of my concussion. Ethan wasn't allowed to visit me at first, but my mother brought me pictures of him, smiling, safe, away from Daniel. That was the only thing keeping me strong. Daniel, meanwhile, was still in custody. The police had denied his bail after reviewing the evidence, including the security footage from the hospital that captured him grabbing me and the bruises on my body. He was charged with aggravated domestic assault, harassment, and endangering a child. But he wasn't done trying to get to me. 2 days after his arrest, he started calling. At first, he was furious. "How dare you do this to me? You think you can take Ethan away from me?" Then he played the victim. "Lena, come on. You know I didn't mean it. We can fix this. We always do." And finally, when none of that worked, he left the most chilling voicemail of all. "You think this is over? You have no idea what you've started." I sent every message and voicemail to my lawyer, Sophia Carter, a fierce woman who had worked on dozens of domestic violence cases. She assured me that his threats would only help my case. "We're going to make sure he never comes near you or Ethan again," she promised. And for the first time, I started to believe it. The days following Daniel's arrest felt like a blur. My mother took Ethan to stay with her, and my father while I remained in the hospital. Even after I was discharged, I couldn't go back home. That house was a prison, a place filled with memories of fear, pain, and walking on eggshells. Instead, I stayed at my parents' house, where for the first time in years I felt safe. But safety didn't mean the fight was over. Daniel had been denied bail, which meant he was still in custody, but my lawyer, Sophia Carter, warned me that he would try everything to manipulate the system. "Men like him think they're invincible," she said as we sat at her office, reviewing the case. "They think they can charm their way out of anything. But we have evidence, and we have your testimony. We're going to make sure he faces real consequences." I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my cast. How long could he go to prison for? Sophia took a deep breath. "Given the severity of the assault, the threats, and his history of abuse, we're pushing for at least 10 years. 10 years. I felt the weight of those words settle in my chest. It was so much longer than the mere 2 years I had originally feared he'd get. But even 10 years didn't feel like enough. He had stolen so much from me, my confidence, my peace, my sense of safety. Still, for the first time, I had something I had never had before. Hope. A week later, the court date was finalized. In just a few months, I would face Daniel in court. The thought made my stomach turn, but I knew it had to be done. Sophia prepared me for what was coming. "He'll try to make you look unstable," she warned. "His lawyer will say you exaggerated, that you're trying to take Ethan away from him out of spite. But we have evidence, Lena. We have the hospital reports, the security footage, your medical records, and his voicemails. He doesn't stand a chance." But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. A few days before the trial, Daniel's lawyer reached out with a plea deal. If Lena agrees to drop the charges, Daniel will accept full custody rights for Ethan. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Drop the charges? Let him have my son? I looked at Sophia, rage burning in my chest. "You tell them no. We're going to trial." Because I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Ethan, too. The day of the trial arrived, and I had never felt so nervous in my life. My hands trembled as I walked into the courthouse, but I wasn't alone. My mother held my arm tightly, her presence grounding me. Sophia walked beside me, radiating confidence. I wasn't just here as a victim. I was here as a fighter. When I entered the courtroom, my stomach tightened at the sight of Daniel. He was sitting at the defense table in his perfectly pressed suit, looking calm, as if this was just another business deal. He even had the nerve to smirk when he saw me, as if none of this mattered. But I knew better. He was afraid. His smirk wasn't confidence, it was an act. He was trying to make me doubt myself. Trying to make me feel small again. Not this time. The trial began, and the prosecutor laid out every piece of evidence against Daniel. The hospital reports detailing my injuries, a fractured arm, a concussion, deep bruising. The security footage from the hospital capturing the moment he grabbed my arm aggressively. The recorded voicemails where he threatened me, insulted me, and tried to manipulate me. I watched Daniel's expression shift ever so slightly with each piece of evidence. The calm, arrogant mask he had put on was beginning to crack. Then the nurse from the hospital testified. I saw him grab her. She was already injured, and he still hurt her again. Next, the police officer who arrested Daniel took the stand. When we arrived, Mr. Foster was aggressive and resisted cooperation. Based on the evidence and witness accounts, we determined he was a threat to the victim. Every word they spoke was a nail in the coffin of Daniel's defense. But his lawyer still tried to twist the story. My client was merely frustrated, his lawyer argued. He never meant to harm his wife. This entire case is exaggerated. Mrs. Foster simply lost her balance on the stairs, and now she's trying to use this to take away his son. I clenched my fists. Lost my balance? He was still trying to make it seem like I was the problem. And that was when it was my turn to take the stand. I took a deep breath as I walked to the witness stand. My hands were shaking, but I gripped the sides of my chair and steadied myself. This was it. This was my moment to finally tell my story, not just for me, but for Ethan, for every time I had been silenced, for every excuse I had made for Daniel. I looked directly at the judge, keeping my voice strong. My name is Lena Foster, and for years, I lived in fear of my husband, Daniel Foster. I told them everything. I described how it had started with small, cutting remarks, how Daniel slowly chipped away at my confidence, how he had made me feel like nothing I did was ever enough, how he started taking out his anger on Ethan, scolding him for the smallest things, making him afraid of his own father. Then I talked about the night he pushed me down the stairs. I described how he had grabbed my arm in anger, how I had pleaded with him not to do this in front of our son, and how the next thing I knew, I was falling. I woke up in a hospital bed, in pain, bruised, with a fractured arm and a concussion. And when my husband came to see me, do you know what he did? He grabbed my arm, my injured arm, and he punched me. He didn't care about my pain. He only cared about control. I glanced at Daniel then, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. I saw fear. He knew he was losing. His lawyer tried to shake me. Mrs. Foster, isn't it possible that you simply lost your footing and fell? Isn't it true that my client never actually pushed you? I met his gaze head-on.
No.
It wasn't an accident. He pushed me. There was no hesitation in my voice. No doubt. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking back my power. The courtroom was silent as we waited for the judge to deliver the final decision. I sat next to Sophia, my hands clenched together so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Daniel hadn't looked at me once since I had finished my testimony. Maybe for the first time, he realized he had lost control over me. That no amount of manipulation could save him now. The judge cleared his throat, and the entire room held its breath. Based on the evidence provided and the testimonies heard, the defendant, Daniel Foster, is found guilty of aggravated domestic assault, harassment, and child endangerment. He is hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison. 15
years.
The words hit me like a wave, knocking the air from my lungs. The gavel struck, sealing Daniel's fate. I looked over at him just as the officers approached to take him into custody. His face was drained of color, his jaw clenched tight. And then, just as they grabbed his arms, he finally turned to look at me. "You'll regret this, Lena," he hissed, his voice low with fury. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I simply stared back at him, my voice steady.
No, Daniel.
I won't. As they led him away, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. It was over. The moment Daniel was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Tears welled in my mother's eyes as she pulled me into a tight embrace. "You did it, sweetheart. It's finally over." Sophia patted my shoulder, a small but satisfied smile on her face. "Justice was served today, Lena. He won't be able to hurt you, or Ethan, ever again." 15 years. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to give us a future. The first night in my new apartment felt strange. The space was small, unfamiliar, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trapped. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next explosion of anger. I wasn't holding my breath. I was free. Ethan had adjusted quicker than I had expected. Children are resilient, and without Daniel in the picture, he began to smile more, laugh more, sleep peacefully without waking up to his father's shouting. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching his favorite cartoon, Ethan turned to me and said, "Mom, you smile more now." His innocent words made my heart clench. Had I really spent so many years not smiling? I ran my fingers through his hair, my voice soft. "That's because we're finally safe, sweetheart." He nodded, a sleepy yawn escaping his lips as he snuggled into my side. And, at that moment, I knew we had survived. At first, I wrote just for myself, a way to process everything I had been through. But one night, on impulse, I decided to share my story online. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few people would read it, maybe no one would. But within weeks, my inbox was flooded with messages. Messages from women who had lived my nightmare. Women who were still trapped. Women who had escaped but didn't know how to rebuild. Women who told me that reading my words made them feel seen, made them feel less alone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose again. I started working with organizations that supported domestic abuse survivors. I connected with lawyers, therapists, and shelters, using my platform to help other women escape their own nightmares. The more I spoke, the stronger I became. The more I helped, the less power Daniel had over me. He had tried to break me, but I had rebuilt myself into something stronger. I spent years letting Daniel define my worth, my choices, my future. But not anymore. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the scared, broken woman I used to be. I see Lena Foster, the survivor. I see the mother who protected her son. The woman who stood up in court and fought back. The woman who refused to be silenced ever again. Because I am free. And I will never be afraid again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. Your support means a lot. Stay tuned for the next story.